Hello and welcome. This is Meet NVivo, the Sleepless student, how to manage your data and work smarter with NVivo 11 for Mac. Although they've opted for the title Sleepless Student, having taught some classes myself, I can say that there are sometimes sleepless instructors as they try to keep up with all of the demands of what's happening in their profession. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, and why don't we go ahead and get things started. My name is Stuart Robertson, and I am a consultant and trainer for NVivo. I've been working with NVivo now for 15 years. I came to it back in 2002 during my doctoral work. I was using NVivo 2 and used it for both my literature review and the work that I did for my dissertation, the research. I did a single case study looking at the social and cultural forces that come to play in the creation of an alternative educational environment. I looked at the creation of a charter school. From there, I continued to work with NVivo for both some of my own research as well as being able to assist others in the research process. One of the things that I had wished along the way was that I had been introduced to NVivo earlier in my doctoral program, so that I could have used it for my classes, that I could have organized the readings that I was doing or the information that I was working with, so that when, for example, I came to my comprehensive exams, I would have all of this information organized and all in one place so that I could easily retrieve it and use it. And today's session is going to talk about that, about thinking beyond just research data, but also information in general. How you can use this to organize a class or your courses, your professional readings, being able to put this material, bring it together in one place, work with it, highlight it, break it into pieces, and be able to quickly and easily retrieve that information. With NVivo for Mac, you can work with a number of different data types. Once you bring them in, there are abilities to analyze your data using queries, advanced queries, and with the newest version of NVivo for Mac, you can actually merge projects together, Mac projects together, so that you could have 2 or 3 people working on a project and be able to merge those projects together to look at the work that was done across the entire team. There are also visualizations available, some basic charts, diagrams, and maps that you can use to create a more visual experience with your data or your information. There are a number of different file types for Mac, from traditional documents to Excel sheets, PDFs, being able to work with Twitter or Facebook data, being able to work with audios or videos and having them as part of your project, pictures as well. And in this representation, it does highlight EndNote as another bibliographic software that you can export out a project and bring it in. But since the creation of this, Mendeley, RefWorks, and Zotero have also been added. So those 4 now, EndNote, Mendeley, RefWorks, and Zotero, are all available. The agenda for this session, and again, this is an overview session to give you some ideas about how you can use it. It's not meant to be a training session. There certainly are a lot of resources that you can use to help learn more about the inner workings of NVivo. And toward the end of the presentation, I certainly will point out where some of those resources are. But this is to give you an overview, touching upon topics such as organizing folders, the smart reading tools, nodes encoding, and perhaps other types of data that you might be working with. When you're working with NVivo 11 and working with information, the first step, of course, is always to gather the information, be able to import it into NVivo, explore and analyze, and perhaps visualize and ultimately share that information in some format. What I'm going to do now is step into NVivo and show you some of the tools that can be of use. Let me just swap my screen out here and swap into NVivo for Mac. So I'll open up the study tools. For those of you who may not have had a chance to see NVivo yet, this is the workspace in NVivo for Mac. Again, some of you may be familiar with the Windows version. You'll see that there are some similarities. For example, the left-hand side is where I have the folders that I can use to organize my data and begin to work with it. I do have a list view that can show me the items that are included in a particular folder, and there is a detail view where I can actually take a look at the items that I have. Within NVivo, you're going to be working with sources. And these are the documents, the articles, the pieces that you're going to be working with inside of NVivo. When you're setting up your project, you want to think about how you will be interacting with this information. All of the items that you bring into an NVivo project are ultimately stored in the internals folder. However, you can create subfolders to keep yourself organized and make it more efficient to get to the information data that you need when you need it. In another part of my life, I actually teach science and math methods to undergraduate, elementary, and early childhood students, so that they're pre-service teachers. And so what I did is I used some of the material that I use in that particular class and organized it in a way that could either be one that my students might use if they were using NVivo to bring some of this material together, or as the professor, being able to organize my own professional material so that I can keep on top of trends and what's happening in my area of expertise. And with that, what I did is I created in the internals folder, I created a course materials. And in this, I could then break it down. If I were teaching more than one course, or if I'm a student in more than one course, I might have a subfolder for the courses that I'm working with. And then underneath that, have a breakdown for some of the types of data that I'm using. So in this case, I used my elementary science teaching methods course that I'll be starting shortly. And underneath it for right now, I've placed articles and papers. Inside of the article folder, this is where I've actually brought in some of the articles that I use both with my students and a couple that I use for my own professional reference. When I want to import documents in NVivo for Mac, I can come up to the Data menu if I wish, and I can import documents, or in this case, PDFs. Oftentimes we're working with PDFs. One piece of information with the PDFs, if they are readable PDFs, you will be able to interact with the text. Most of the newer PDFs are all readable, so you can work with that. If you do have an older version of an article or one that you may have scanned yourself, you may need to apply an optical character recognition program, OCR, and that would be done prior to bringing it in. NVivo doesn't have an OCR program. So in this case, I brought in the PDFs. They can come in through the Data menu if I wish. There's also ribbon structure for those of you who interact more that way. Under Data, I have the ability to bring in PDFs. And for those of you who are right clickers, you've come over from the Windows world. If you do have that available, you also can right click and import as well. Most of the time today I'll be using the menu, but I want to make you aware of those other options. So in this case, I brought in some articles. What's nice about this is I can then go and open up those articles, be able to review them within the program itself. And as I'm reading through, again, this is basically just as you would do in a traditional paper and pencil world. You'd have the article in front of you, you'd be reading it, you'd highlight information and so that you could come back and find it more easily. In the NVivo world, you're highlighting it and you're actually placing it into something that we call a node. And you can think of a node as a bin. It's simply a place where I can pull together pieces of information that address a particular topic or concept or theme, perhaps give an example of that concept, theme, or idea, and be able to do that across different data sources so that when I'm ready to sort of delve into that concept, that idea, I open up the node, and now in one place, I can see all of the pieces of information that I've gathered about that. I can see how that concept, theme, or idea has manifested itself across multiple data sources and look for potential trends or patterns or similarities or differences when I'm working with that. Basically, when you're thinking about a node, think about if for every piece of data you highlighted, you had made copies and cut them apart and put them into piles or boxes in front of you. That's basically what you're doing, but far more efficiently. If I take a look at the nodes, I can create nodes before I get started. I can create nodes while I'm interacting with my information. So these were, I had done a little bit of work prior to this session so that there were some topics that I was interested in, from the role of self-efficacy to the idea of student engagement. I also, because some of my articles dealt with multiple subject areas, I actually created a couple of nodes that would help me just to split up that data by the subject area that it went with. So for example, if I came across student engagement in terms of science, I could take that piece of data and code it to student engagement and code it to science. So later on, if I wanted to look at student engagement, I have the student engagement, which will show me all the things that I found about that. Or I could actually use the something we call a coding query and say to NVivo, show me everything that's coded at the intersection of student engagement and science. And now I would only see student engagement examples from the content area or subject area of science. So I definitely will be able to show you a little bit more about the coding queries in just a few moments. I wanted to talk, though, just a few minutes about getting data into some of these nodes and thinking about organizing some of this information. So, for example, they're talking about the purpose of science inquiry. So if we're looking at this, one reason clearly there is to develop scientifically literate persons who together become a scientifically and technologically literate society. So I may want to create a node. And so in my nodes folder, I could go to create and create a new top level node. And I'll call this purpose of teaching science. You'll notice the interface is built around a traditional Mac interface. It does not look like our Windows version at all, and that was done purposely. This was designed from the ground up. Once I have a node, I can certainly then take the information, highlight it, and then be able to drag and drop it into the node. And as I continue reading, if there were some more pieces, I could then add them to that particular node. And be able to continue to drop them in. If I want to see the data that I've placed inside of a node, I can double click to open up that node, and NVivo will show me first of all where this data has come from. So I would have different sections inside the node, one section for each of the sources that data has been drawn from or information has been drawn from. It will show me the number of references. So far, there's only 2 references from this particular article. And the percentage coverage basically tells me how much of this article, this source, is represented inside of this particular node. So right now, this source has less than half of 1% of it represented here. Some people will look at the coverage to try to identify areas of rich information where there seems to be a lot. Other people don't pay attention to the percentage coverage at all. They focus solely on the information. One is not better than the other. They're just different ways that you can utilize the information that NVivo provides. What's also nice about this is the label that identifies where it came from also acts as a link. So if I click on that link, it will bring me back into that particular source, and I'll be able to see highlighted the data that has been coded to that particular node. So from a researcher perspective, that was something that was important to me because I was never far away from my data in its full context. So that can, of course, be incredibly helpful. Again, I can turn on and off the highlighting if I wish as I'm working through some of this information. There are a couple of text-based queries that can also help me when I may be starting to interact with a particular article. Under the query menu here, one of them is the word frequency. Oftentimes I will use this if I'm approaching a new article I haven't read before. So I may go ahead and pull a selected item out of here, and I'll go into my internals and pull a particular article that I'm about to interact with, about to read. And I'll go ahead and maybe I'll want to look at the top 100 words. And NVivo will provide me with a list in order of raw count of the words that are there. You'll notice that words like a and the are not listed. There is a stop words list. I can also add words to the stop words list. So for example, I might not need some of these pieces here. I can select those and add those to my stop words list. Typically, I'm going to use my right click to add it to my stop words list so that if I rerun this query, they no longer appear. One of the visualizations that goes along that NVivo has, and it goes along with the word frequency, is the idea of a word cloud. So that if I wanted to get a sense of what the most frequently used words were, I have that ability. I'm more of a visual person, so a structure like this is sometimes helpful for me, more so than just a plain list. But this way, before I start reading the article, in my mind, I now have some key words that I know I want to pay attention to, and I've sort of primed my brain to be a more efficient reader within that article. That being said, I also like to point out, for example, I've created the folder that says papers. If I've written some papers, if I've written a paper and perhaps I'm getting ready for a presentation, I could, if I've saved the paper inside of my project, I could run a word frequency on my own paper, see what my top words are, and create a word cloud that I could then use as part of a presentation, either in a report itself, an article that I'm writing, or a PowerPoint presentation, a keynote presentation. The other thing that's nice about this is if I think about what were the main ideas and thoughts I wanted to get across in this paper, if I look at my word cloud and I see that maybe there's a key word or words either missing or very small, I may want to go back and check that I've given adequate information for that information, to just double check what I wrote there. So don't. A lot of times people think about NVivo as being able to work with their data and their information, which it certainly can. But I like to help people think out of the box, so that you can see that it can be used in other ways as well. even using the own work that you're looking at. All right. Another key query that I do use is the text search query. And with the text search query, if I know that there's a keyword or key terms that I want to zero in on, this is where I can put them in and ask NVivo to find those key terms for me. So in an example, if I know that I need to collect information or data about the idea of self-efficacy, instead of going through each of the articles, if I wanted to expedite the process a little to get started, then I can type in, for example, the word efficacy. I could look across all of my sources and be able to run that query, and I can see which of my sources have that word in it. I can look at the reference view to see how that word is being used. I can also look at a visualization called a word tree. And the word tree is a very nice way for me to get a sense of how is that word being used across multiple data sources. And are there some keywords coming right before or right after that particular word? So I can see what I might want to be able to pay attention to. So for example, there's the idea of science teaching efficacy. And then there's the larger idea of self-efficacy. And I may want to go and right-click on that and run another text search query for self-efficacy and be able to see that information. If I wish, I can take the results of this and save the results to a node. So this is one way I could jumpstart creating a node. So I could save the results. I can create a new node, or in this case, I actually have, let me leave the results folder here. I want to put it in the nodes folder. And I actually have a node called the role of self-efficacy. And I can go ahead and talk about this, create I apologize for that. Not sure why it's, let me go with self-efficacy. In this case, it's created it twice. So what I could do, just to show you, I can take and copy that node, and I can merge it into the already existing node. And then I can delete the extra node so that I have those pieces together. So again, I can use the queries to help me speed up the process. And if I'm looking at some of this information as well, if I want to save these results, and maybe what I'll do is I'll put them in the science folder. And again, be able to just quickly merge these two together. And with those pieces in place, now what I can do is I can start to show you how I can then take and work with some of this information after I've gone through and I've coded it. For example, earlier I mentioned the coding query. So the coding query allows me to find data that might be at the intersection of two different nodes. It could be if I'm in my traditional data where I have attributes, I certainly could use the attributes to find the intersection of attributes and data that is assigned to cases with those attributes. In this example, though, I wanted to see what was said about self-efficacy in the idea of science. So if I had some in science, some in math, and I wanted to focus particularly on science, I could look at the nodes, the data coded at, in this example, I'll use all of these nodes, which is the Boolean and. Any of these nodes would be the Boolean or, and any case where would be allow me to pull together any of the attributes that I've created. So all of these nodes, and I'm going to say the role of self-efficacy and the idea of science. When I run the query, NVivo will then show me all of the information that would be coded at that intersection. And along the way, I would have expanded upon some of this coding so I'd have more than just a single word, but for purposes of providing a sense of how this piece works, I'd be able to see the data that I've coded to both of those nodes. There are other times, though, when I might want to be able to take a look across multiple data sources or multiple articles to see who might be my go-to author for a particular topic or what might be my go-to article or articles. And in that case, I may use the matrix coding query. And the matrix coding query allows me to basically perform multiple coding queries simultaneously. So for example, if I were about to sit down and write a paper, and I wanted to know which articles are going to tell me most about student engagement or the role of self-efficacy, I can go ahead and select the various articles that I have, and I can choose any or all of them. And basically what I'm doing is I'm setting up a crosstabs. So in my columns, I'll use my plus sign here, and say for selected items, I'll go to my nodes. And let's say that I wanted to look at those three particular topics. When I go ahead and I run the query, NVivo allows me to see in a nice crosstab simple format here which articles are talking about which topics. And that way, if I'm writing a section on a particular topic here, I can go to that article and review that. Or what's also nice is right from the matrix, if I double click on a cell, NVivo will open up and show me the data behind that, the information behind that. so that I could then take a look and see what was said. And again, if I wanted to go back, I could use the link to come back into the article and be able to look at it in its full context. Also, if I wanted to be able to quote, this brings me back to the article, and I can see the page that it's on and have some of that information available. One last thing that I did want to mention while I'm inside of NVivo. Sometimes when we're reading articles, we want to be able to make little notes in the margins. And in terms of NVivo, that would be one where I could highlight a particular piece of data here, and I could choose to create an annotation. So I'm going to, I stand corrected. I apologize. I always do this backwards. I do apologize for that. So let me create a new annotation here. That's when I want to find the annotation. I do apologize. I jump back and forth between the Windows and Mac versions, and every now and then I have a hiccup. But I could say, here is a list to reference with current curriculum. And NVivo will show me that this blue highlighting will stay with this text no matter what, even if I come up to view and I close my highlighting. This stays to let me know that there is an annotation there, and I can put my cursor over it and be able to see it. And here I can also see, I can look at all of the annotations, and I can click on one, and NVivo will highlight it to see it. So you have the ability to be able to create what would be notes in the margins if you wish to be able to do something such as that. All right, let me return for just a couple of more minutes to the PowerPoint presentation here, and hit upon some other topics, and then I will turn my attention to the questions. For those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to dabble with NVivo, but you're thinking that it might be something that would be of use to you, I would strongly urge you to try the 14-day free trial. It is the full working version. Nothing is held back. And any of the work that you do, the projects that you create in the free trial, you are going to be able to open with the full license, so at the licensed versions, if you go that route. So you're not going to lose anything, any of the work that you've done. You can be able to open them that way. But this is a great way to get a quick feel for the potential. There are discounted student licenses. There are full licenses available. And in organizations, there are enterprise licenses. So for some of you, if you're at a college or university, there could possibly be some licenses already available for that, for you. So I would encourage you to check with your IT department and see what might be there that you could perhaps gain access to. All of this information, you can reach out to the QSR website at www.qsrinternational.com. That's all one word, QSR International. And that information is there, and also how you can get in touch with our various offices from around the world. Currently, we have offices in Australia, our corporate headquarters, here in the US, UK, Japan, and Kuala Lumpur, I believe, are where we are right now. To help you get started and to find out a little bit more about some of these tools, QSR has its own YouTube channel that has tutorials on it. On the QSR website, there's the NVivo Knowledge Center, and that has a collection of many different recordings of webinars such as this, but also guest speakers that we've had come in. The one thing that I will say from the Mac perspective, most of our webinars were done in the Windows world with the Windows version. However, there is probably about 80% compatibility, so it would definitely be worthwhile to get an idea of how you might be able to use these in your area. There are user communities such as a forum on the QSR website or Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook groups. The online help documents that you can access through the help menu right inside the software are really phenomenal. They do a fantastic job of taking you step by step through how to, go through the steps of how to do certain pieces, run certain structures, like how to run a matrix coding query. And we also have free webinars such as the Meet NVivo series. Some of you, I know that you're back with me again, and thank you for coming back. I appreciate that because we've done others, for example, using it with the literature review, visualizing your data, working with social media. So there are a number of different ways that you can get ideas about how you might be able to utilize some of the tools within the software. I do know that some of you do need to depart, so I want to make sure that I thank you for being with me. I do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. What I'm going to do now is swap over, and I'll be back to answer questions in just a moment.